Deep within the dusty, forgotten corners of the Vance estate, Leo uncovers a relic that should be entirely dead, a retro 1980s answering machine that pulses with a sinister crimson glow, despite being completely unplugged. Every night at exactly 9 o'clock, the gears grind to life, broadcasting frantic, whispered warnings from 24 hours in the future that effortlessly rewrite his reality into something flawlessly perfect. But the intoxicating thrill of mastering time shatters when a new voice cuts through the static, a breathless scream from a future wife he hasn't even met yet, begging him to smash the machine before the stroke of midnight claims them both. With a terrifying countdown rapidly ticking away on the digital display and the timeline fracturing around him, Leo is forced to face a heartbreaking choice between a scripted paradise and a reality he might not survive. What happens when the future you altered decides to hunt you down?
Before we dive into the next mind-bending episode, we want to know more about our incredible community. What city are you watching from tonight? Please drop your city's name in the comments below so we can get to know each other better. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single dramatic twist. The attic of the old Vance estate smelled exactly like forgotten time, a heavy, suffocating mixture of dried cedar, decaying cardboard, and decades of undisturbed dust that danced lazily in the single beam of amber sunlight piercing the grime-stained window. For 17-year-old Leo, this cramped space at the top of the creaking wooden stairs was a physical manifestation of his own mind. Ever since his grandfather Arthur passed away a year ago, Leo had felt entirely marooned in his own life, moving through his senior year like a ghost while the rest of the world spun vibrantly ahead. He was stuck in neutral, utterly invisible, living under the heavy, crushing shadow of a brilliant man he could never hope to replicate. Wiping a layer of sweat and gray soot from his forehead, Leo dragged another heavy box of ancient radio schematics across the floorboards. His heart felt just as hollow as the empty house downstairs. He sighed, sinking onto a worn-out velvet armchair, surrounded by the silent relics of his grandfather's eccentric past. That was when his foot knocked against something solid hidden beneath a frayed wool blanket. Curious, Leo reached down and pulled away the fabric, revealing a hefty, retro 1980s cassette answering machine. It was a block of faux wood paneling and matte black plastic, its dual micro-cassette tapes sitting motionless behind a scratched plastic window. It looked entirely ordinary, an obsolete piece of junk tech from a bygone era that had no business working. Yet, as Leo traced the cold edges of the machine, an inexplicable chill rippled down his spine. The air in the attic suddenly grew thick and completely still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to wake the machine up. The heavy silence of the attic broke when Leo noticed a frayed power cable snaking out from beneath the machine's plastic base. Driven by a sudden nervous curiosity, he untangled the wire and plugged it into a nearby extension cord, fully expecting a dead spark or the smell of burning dust. Instead, a sharp mechanical click echoed through the cramped space, followed by a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated right through the floorboards. Leo took a step back, his eyes locking onto a tiny LED light that suddenly began to pulse with a vibrant, hypnotic crimson glow. There were no telephone lines connected to the device, nor any wires linking it to the outside world, yet the machine behaved as if it were receiving an active signal. He held his breath as the internal gears groaned, slowly turning the tiny magnetic wheels of the micro-cassette tape. Then, without warning, a loud, piercing electronic ring shattered the air, making Leo jump so violently his shoulder clipped a stack of old books. It rang a second time, a harsh, demanding sound that felt impossibly loud in the enclosed room. His fingers trembled as he hovered them over the faded control panel, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. With a swallow of pure adrenaline, he pushed down the heavy plastic play button. A burst of loud, crackling static filled the room,
followed by a voice that stole the air right out of his lungs. It was an older, deeply panicked voice, breathless and laced with an unbearable urgency. But the cadence, the pitch, and the slight stutter were terrifyingly unmistakable. It was his own voice.
The recorded voice cut through the static, pleading with an intensity that made Leo's skin crawl before the tape abruptly hissed and fell completely silent. Unable to process the impossible audio, he grabbed his phone with shaking hands and dialed Maya, begging her to come over immediately without explaining why. Within 20 minutes, she was sitting cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, her analytical eyes darting between Leo's pale face and the ancient wood-paneled machine. When Leo pressed play again, the recording rasped to life, the older version of himself stating with absolute certainty that their school counselor, Mr. Green, would drop a ceramic emerald mug at exactly 8:15 a.m. the next morning. Maya let out a soft, skeptical laugh, shaking her head as she pointed out that the digital display on the answering machine was blinking with a bizarre, impossible date, tomorrow's date.
She insisted it was a cruel prank or a clever modification engineered by his late grandfather, refusing to let Leo's growing paranoia infect her logical mind. Yet the next morning found them both standing frozen in the crowded high school hallway, staring intently through the glass pane of the guidance office. The clock on the wall clicked to 8:15, and at that exact second, Mr. Green fumbled his paperwork, sending his favorite green mug crashing onto the linoleum floor. Maya's laughter died instantly in her throat as the ceramic shattered, the precise reality of the prediction turning her skepticism into pure, unadulterated dread. The shattering of the mug changed everything, shifting their reality from an ordinary summer into a surreal game of waiting for the clock to strike 9. Every single evening at that exact hour, the crimson LED light would begin its rhythmic pulsing, signaling the arrival of a new, highly detailed transmission from 24 hours in the future. Leo found himself rushing up the attic stairs night after night, completely consumed by the thrilling, addictive power of knowing what lay ahead before anyone else did. He began using the minor secrets whispered through the static to alter his daily routine, effortlessly avoiding embarrassing social blunders and flawlessly acing a surprise pop quiz that left his teachers speechless. For the first time in his life, the crushing feeling of being invisible began to fade, replaced by an intoxicating rush of confidence as classmates finally started noticing him. Maya watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and growing concern, noticing how Leo's eyes remained constantly glued to the clock, waiting for the next instruction. He was no longer living in the moment. Instead, he was merely executing a script written by a future version of himself, relying entirely on the machine to dictate his every word and action. The loneliness that had plagued him for a year was temporarily buried beneath this new artificial perfection, making him feel completely invincible against the uncertainties of tomorrow. The artificial perfection of Leo's new life began to show its fractures on a humid Thursday evening when Maya refused to celebrate his latest successful prediction. Sitting on the edge of his bed, she pointed out that by avoiding every minor discomfort, he was altering the natural timeline of their lives, creating tiny ripples in reality that they couldn't possibly predict or control. Leo dismissed her anxieties with a wave of his hand, arguing that the machine was a gift from his grandfather, a tool designed to finally lift him out of the stagnant rut he had been trapped in for so long. Their argument was cut short when the clock chimed 9 p.m., and the familiar electronic ring summoned them back up to the suffocating heat of the attic. This time, the voice pouring from the speaker lacked the triumphant tone of the previous nights, sounding instead frayed, exhausted, and deeply burdened by a heavy weight. The future Leo warned that a major mistake was looming on the horizon, a decision born of pure arrogance that would destroy something precious if he didn't listen carefully. The transmission cut off with a harsh burst of white noise, leaving a profound, chilling silence in its wake that made Leo's confidence vanish instantly. Maya looked at him, her eyes reflecting the crimson glow of the LED light, silently demanding to know if this dangerous aim was still worth the hidden price they were beginning to pay. The warning from the machine manifested the very next evening, delivered in a voice so frantic it sounded entirely detached from the confident Leo of the previous days.
The speaker rattled as the future voice explicitly commanded him to stop Maya from taking the old bridge road on her way home from her volunteering shift the next afternoon. Leo spent the entire morning in a state of high anxiety, the weight of the unspoken secret pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe. When the afternoon sun began to dip, he intercepted Maya at her bicycle rack, desperately inventing a series of flimsy, increasingly ridiculous excuses to force her onto the longer highway route. Maya grew visibly frustrated by his erratic behavior and intense, controlling demeanor, demanding a real explanation as she tried to steer her bike toward her usual path. Left with no choice, Leo grabbed her handlebars, his face pale as he begged her to just trust him blindly, unable to reveal the existence of the tape without sounding completely insane.
She finally relented with a sigh of deep disappointment, turning away from him and taking the longer road, leaving a massive, painful strain on their lifelong friendship. Later that evening, a local news alert confirmed that a massive oak tree had collapsed directly onto the old bridge road at the exact time Maya would have been riding under it. The news of the collapsed tree offered Leo no comfort, serving only to heighten the agonizing friction between his logical mind and the desperate impulses of his heart. Seeking answers to the machine's origins, he began tearing through the remaining boxes in the attic, eventually discovering a leather-bound journal hidden behind a false wall in his grandfather's old workbench. The yellowed pages were filled with Arthur's precise, elegant handwriting, detailing his secret lifelong obsession with building what he called a temporal harmonic receiver. According to the notes, the device didn't just record audio, it anchored itself to the psychological frequency of the operator, creating a bridge across time that grew stronger with every single interaction. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor, reading how his grandfather had eventually abandoned the project out of pure fear, realizing that knowing the future robbed a person of their free will. His mind reeled as he realized he was standing at a terrifying crossroads, knowing he should smash the machine to pieces to preserve his own humanity. Yet, looking at the faded photographs of his grandfather, Leo felt a deep emotional pull to keep the machine alive, viewing it as the only remaining connection to the brilliant man he missed so terribly. The emotional pull to keep the machine proved disastrous, as the daily messages began to lose their clear, linear predictability, morphing into a chaotic jumble of overlapping timelines. The voice that spoke at 9 p.m. now sounded profoundly strained and confused, as if the future Leo was struggling to remember which version of reality he was actually living in. The machine revealed that by intervening on the old bridge road, Leo had inadvertently caused a chain reaction that resulted in a serious financial loss for Maya's family business down the street. It became terrifyingly apparent that every time Leo used the future to fix a small problem, a much larger, more complicated issue was generated elsewhere in the timeline, like water leaking through a cracking dam. The voice on the tape began to glitch, repeating phrases in a breathless loop, warning that the fabric of his current reality was becoming dangerously unstable. Leo stared at his own reflection in the dusty window pane, horrified to realize that his desperate quest for a perfect life was actually dismantling the world around him. He wanted to confess everything to Maya, but the fear of her hatred and the absolute absurdity of the truth kept his lips completely sealed, trapping him in a prison of his own design. The prison of silence became even heavier when a strange, unexpected frequency overrode the usual transmission, replacing the future Leo's voice with a cascade of deep, resonant static. Leo leaned closer to the plastic speaker, his heart stopping as the white noise cleared to reveal a voice he hadn't heard in over 12 long months. It was Arthur Vance, his voice clear, steady, and echoing with the familiar, comforting warmth of a man who had loved his grandson unconditionally.
The recording had been captured decades ago, yet Arthur spoke directly to Leo, acknowledging that if his grandson was listening to this tape, the temporal receiver had successfully activated. The old man's words carried a solemn, heavy warning, explaining that the machine was a mirror that reflected a person's deepest insecurities, luring them into a trap of endless anticipation. Arthur confessed that he had built the machine during a time of immense loneliness, hoping to bypass the pain of uncertainty, only to realize that uncertainty was the very thing that gave life its beauty. The tape hissed softly as Arthur pleaded with Leo to understand that the machine didn't just predict a person's fate, it actively consumed their present, leaving them with nothing but a scripted existence devoid of genuine joy. The profound wisdom of Arthur's final words faded into a sharp electronic tone that signaled the immediate return of the standard, terrifying tomorrow timestamp. This new message was short, brutal, and delivered in a whisper that sounded completely broken by grief, focusing entirely on the upcoming annual Oakwood Summer Festival. The voice from tomorrow laid out a devastating ultimatum. If Leo attended the festival, he would successfully impress the visiting university scout and secure the prestigious marketing scholarship he had dreamed of for years. However, the voice cracked with an agonizing sob as it added the final crushing condition. Attending that specific event meant he would completely fail to notice Maya entering a situation that would destroy their friendship forever. Leo collapsed against the wall, the weight of the choice pressing down on his chest like a physical block of concrete, tearing his soul into two distinct pieces. He was being forced to choose between his biggest professional dream, the ticket out of his invisibility, and the one person who had actually seen him for who he was before the magic started. The machine sat silently on the workbench, its red light pulsing slowly, a mechanical judge waiting for him to decide which part of his life he was willing to sacrifice. The agonizing weight of the ultimatum drove Leo to a state of absolute desperation as the clock crept closer to the day of the festival. Frantic and sobbing silently, he grabbed the thick power cord of the answering machine and ripped it violently from the wall outlet, expecting the hum to die instantly. Instead, the crimson LED light remained completely illuminated, burning with an impossible internal energy that defied every known law of physics and electrical engineering. The machine began to whir on its own, the plastic gears turning aggressively as a real-time voice poured from the speaker, responding directly to his sudden outburst of anger. The future Leo screamed through the static, telling him that running away from the choice was completely impossible, and that destroying the physical shell wouldn't erase the timeline he had already altered. The emotional volume in the attic peaked to a suffocating level, the air growing hot and heavy as the voice mocked his helplessness, forcing him to face his own cowardice. Leo fell to his knees, covering his ears to block out the sound of his own future self, realizing with absolute horror that he was completely trapped inside a nightmare of his own creation. The nightmare reached its breaking point an hour later, when Maya unexpectedly climbed the attic stairs, holding a discarded journal entry she had found on the lawn. Her face was a mask of betrayal and confusion as she confronted Leo, demanding to know why his grandfather's notes described the exact events that had been happening to them all week. A massive, emotional argument erupted between them, their voices echoing off the wooden rafters, as months of unspoken tension and hidden fears finally exploded into the open.
Leo defended his actions with tears streaming down his face, confessing his deepest, most pathetic insecurity, that without the machine's guidance, he was just an ordinary, invisible kid who would never achieve anything great. Maya stepped back, her eyes shining with tears of her own, as she told him that his obsession with a perfect future was blinding him to the people who already loved him in the messy present. She told him that she had never thought he was invisible, but his complete reliance on a plastic box was making him a stranger she could no longer recognize or trust. The words cut deeper than any physical blow,
leaving them both standing in the dusty room, separated by a wide, heartbreaking chasm of mutual grief. The heartbreaking silence that followed their argument was suddenly shattered by a loud, erratic ringing from the answering machine, its crimson light flashing in a wild, frantic pattern.
Both Leo and Maya froze as the play button depressed itself with a heavy mechanical click, unleashing a transmission that sounded completely overwhelmed by a roaring rush of wind. The voice from tomorrow sounded different this time. It was calm, resolved, and completely stripped of the panic that had characterized the previous messages. It stated with absolute certainty that this would be the final message the machine would ever produce, because at exactly midnight, the ancient, faulty wiring inside the attic walls would experience a catastrophic electrical short. The voice explained that the resulting fire would consume the entire Vance estate, erasing every single piece of his grandfather's legacy and everything they had built, unless Leo chose to stay inside to save the machine. The digital display began a rapid, glowing countdown toward midnight, turning the small room into a ticking time bomb that forced them to confront the ultimate expiration date of their magical reality.
The final minutes before midnight ticked away with an agonizing slowness, the air in the attic growing increasingly charged with static electricity that made their hair stand on end. Leo stood paralyzed before the workbench, staring at the glowing countdown, while Maya desperately pulled at his arm, begging him to abandon the room and run outside into the safety of the cool night. As the clock struck 12, a loud, sharp pop echoed from the wall outlet, followed by a bright cascade of brilliant yellow sparks that immediately caught on a pile of old schematics. The flames began to lick up the wooden wall with a terrifying speed, casting long, dancing shadows across the room and illuminating the answering machine, which began to wail with a continuous electronic tone. Leo's hands hovered over the device, his mind screaming at him to grab it and preserve the magic, knowing that letting it burn meant letting go of his grandfather forever. But as he looked at Maya, who refused to leave his side despite the smoke beginning to fill the air, a profound clarity finally washed over his soul. He reached for the heavy fire extinguisher instead of the machine, choosing the real, breathing person standing next to him over the dangerous illusions of a mechanical future. The heavy white foam from the extinguisher billowed across the workbench, smothering the yellow flames and instantly short-circuiting the inner mechanisms of the ancient answering machine. With a final, agonizing metallic screech, the crimson LED light flickered wildly before dying completely, leaving the attic in a state of profound, natural darkness. Leo dropped the empty canister onto the floorboards, his breath coming in ragged, heavy gasps, as the silence of a normal night returned to the Vance estate. Together, he and Maya managed to safely pull the main electrical breaker in the hallway, ensuring that the faulty wiring was entirely dead and could no longer pose a threat to the house. Sitting on the top step of the stairs in the dark, Leo felt a sudden, massive weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by the cool reality of a completely unwritten tomorrow. The machine was gone, its memory loops destroyed by his own deliberate choice, leaving him without a single clue as to what the next day would bring. He turned to Maya, his eyes adjusting to the shadows, and offered her a genuine, wary smile, realizing that losing his superpower was the most liberating thing that had ever happened to him. The next morning dawned with a brilliant golden sunlight that flooded through the clean windows of the Vance estate, washing away the lingering smell of smoke and old dust. Leo woke up at 7 a.m., experiencing a profound, unfamiliar sensation that he hadn't felt in weeks, an absolute, beautiful ignorance of what the day had in store for him. The intense, paralyzing anxiety that had governed his every waking moment was completely gone, replaced by an exciting sense of freedom that made his heart feel incredibly light. He walked down to the kitchen, where his mother was pouring coffee, and engaged in a completely unscripted, genuine conversation that felt remarkably warm and authentic. Later, he met Maya at the local diner, where they ordered breakfast without consulting a digital display or worrying about a hidden timeline of events. The world around him seemed more vibrant,
the colors sharper, and the sounds of the town louder, as if he had finally stepped out from behind a thick glass screen and into reality. He realized that the emptiness he had carried at the beginning of the summer wasn't because he lacked a glorious future, but because he had stopped participating in the beautiful, messy present. The beautiful freedom of the present allowed Leo and Maya to spend the remaining weeks of summer repairing the fractured pieces of their lifelong bond. Without the heavy burden of the machine between them, they spent hours talking on the porch, laughing about ordinary things, and sharing their genuine fears about the upcoming college application season. Leo decided to return to the attic, not to search for magic, but to utilize his grandfather's old engineering tools to create something tangible with his own two hands. He began collecting discarded, non-magical radios from flea markets, spending his afternoons carefully cleaning their components and restoring their warm, analog voices for the townspeople. This new hobby brought him a profound sense of purpose that didn't rely on predicting the future, allowing him to honor Arthur's legacy through hard work rather than temporal shortcuts. He discovered that he wasn't invisible after all. The local shopkeepers began to recognize him as the talented Vance kid who could make old things sing again. Maya watched his progress with a proud, affectionate smile, knowing that Leo had finally found his own voice, completely independent of the whispers from tomorrow. The transition into the autumn months brought a profound sense of maturity to Leo's daily routine, shifting his perspective from a boy afraid of the dark into a young man eager for life. The attic was no longer a place of suffocating ghosts and ancient secrets. Instead, he had opened the windows wide, letting the crisp autumn air circulate through a bright, functional workshop. He no longer felt stuck in the heavy shadow of his grandfather's immense genius, realizing that Arthur wouldn't have wanted him to copy his life, but to build an entirely unique one. His senior year resumed not with the artificial perfection of a time traveler, but with the honest, rewarding effort of a student working hard for his own achievements. He applied for local scholarships using an essay that detailed his actual struggles with loneliness and growth, a piece of writing that was deeply authentic and entirely his own. When he walked through the school hallways now, he no longer looked at the clocks with a sense of dread or anticipation, content to let each minute pass naturally. He had learned to embrace the natural rhythm of life, understanding that the value of a single day lay in its unpredictability and the genuine choices he made. The ultimate validation of this new perspective arrived on a rainy Saturday afternoon, while Leo was deep cleaning the inner casing of a broken 1950s console radio. His fingers brushed against a thick piece of parchment tucked beneath the heavy copper transformer, revealing a standard, non-magical letter written in his grandfather's unmistakable hand. The ink was faded but perfectly legible, containing a message that Arthur had penned shortly before his passing, intended to be found only when Leo was truly ready. The letter didn't contain any complex mathematical formulas or terrifying predictions about the future. Instead, it offered simple, profound words of grandfatherly love and encouragement. Arthur wrote that he had always seen the immense potential locked inside Leo's quiet heart, urging him never to look to machines or external signs to find his true worth. The old man concluded with a sentence that brought tears of pure closure to Leo's eyes. "The future is a beautiful mystery because we don't know it yet, my boy. Live well, love deeply, and always trust the strength of your own heart." Leo folded the paper carefully, placing it in his breast pocket, feeling an incredible sense of peace wash over his entire being. The rain eventually cleared, leaving the evening sky painted in breathtaking strokes of lavender and gold as the warm summer breeze swept through the open windows of the Vance estate. On the front porch, the old, fire-damaged answering machine sat quietly on a wooden side table, its plastic casing warped and its crimson light forever dark, transformed from a terrifying oracle into an ordinary piece of nostalgic history. Leo sat on the steps beside Maya, watching the fireflies begin to blink across the lawn, his hands folded peacefully in his lap, without a single urge to check the time.
For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the suffocating need to know what tomorrow held, because he finally understood that the uncertainty of life wasn't a curse to be feared, but a gift to be cherished. "Do you ever wonder what the tapes would say about tonight?" Maya asked softly, her shoulder bumping against his with the familiar, comforting warmth of a restored friendship. Leo smiled, shaking his head as he looked out at the horizon, feeling a profound, unshakable strength vibrating within his chest. "It doesn't matter," he replied, his voice steady and filled with an authentic confidence that no machine could ever provide. Because the best messages aren't the ones recorded on a magnetic tape from tomorrow. They are the ones we actively write with our own choices, day by day, alongside the people we love. The heavy silence that used to haunt him was gone, replaced by the beautiful, unwritten symphony of the present moment.
Turning away from the silent relic of the past, Leo stepped forward into the gathering dusk, ready to embrace the magnificent mystery of an unknown future, completely free.